trailblazer of manscaping. He probably was.
Oh, he was so far ahead of his curve. I'd never seen a man pluck his eyebrows before until I met Bagwell. He literally, and this is back now, people are doing it all the time now. There's actually a technique, I don't know what it's called, but you go to the eyebrow lady and she does these things with your eyebrows and they come out and they're like perfect. They look like they were painted on. Bagwell was so far ahead of that curve, it's not even funny.
I mean, look at the way he's got the V in the back of the hair. His sideburns of the V. He's got the goatee trimmed up. I'm just saying, how is he walking around this earth without a Manscaped sponsorship?
You know what? I agree with you. We should try to make that connection because he could be the face of Manscaped.
He's buff. He trims his stuff using the lawnmower. Just see it.
Listen to you go. You found your calling. You should be an ad copywriter.
I mean, I have done some pretty terrible ad reads here on the show.
Now, that one was awesome, though. The segment, the transition from commentary into that spot was, I just sent you a message, man. That was a beautiful thing.
Hey, here he is, Buff Bagwell's doing an interview, and guess what he's talking about? The writers.
Oh, God.
Buff says he's not going to do any more jobs. And then two bald guys in suits, we know them as Ron and Don Harris, they're going to come out and destroy him. And Meltzer would say, great, now they're recruiting 6'8" guys who even Titan doesn't want.
And what you're seeing here, and a lot of this is because we know what happened, Russo is making himself the star of the show.
Absolutely.
And it started the first night. So as much as Russo will, say that wasn't the case, and he didn't want to be a TV star, blah, 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 blah. He was forced to do it because he's such a great character. I mean, he's literally said this shit, that, like, he was one of the better performers in the entire roster. He said that. His words, not mine. It's ridiculous. But Vince Russo came to WCW with the idea that he was going to be Vince McMahon or he was going to be Eric Bischoff. That's what he saw in his head when he got there. And everything that we've been watching so far leads to that end.
In fairness, because I agree with you. I mean, when we saw Jeff Jarrett come out and say he's got, more stroke with the superpowers, and now you're seeing here, and by the way, the superpowers are Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara. And Ron and Don Harris here are clearly the henchmen for these superpowers. And even Meltzer would say they ought to compare the quarter hours that the DOA, which is what they were called when they were the Disciples of Apocalypse over in WWE, what they did head-to-head with, like, Juventud Guerrera. So Meltzer's just saying, hey, Ron and Don Harris, fans don't want to see them, whatever. But I will stick up for Russo in this regard. What had worked so well in WWE had been positioning. By the way, I don't know if you saw that, but we just saw Chris Benoit standing still, waiting for a countdown, and then he started walking towards the camera. It was made to look like it was, hey, we caught a candid moment, and we're taking a look at him. But he was still sitting flat-footed, and then he started walking, but the camera just caught it all. It's not like the camera just caught him walking. It's a little thing, but I know we're trying to say this is reality TV and it's crash TV, but not if it feels forced. And again, I know that we just talked about this a minute ago. I love Chris Benoit's in-ring action. I don't love what he did as a person. We all know that. But Dean Malenko, same thing. Man, Dean Malenko in the confines of a pro wrestling ring, sign me up. But instead, on our first night here, we're going to take them out of that, and we're going to make it Benoit and Malenko in a street fight. Now, don't get me wrong. I've seen some great street fights with Chris Benoit and Kevin Sullivan. Iconic matches that WCW fans will never forget. But I'd rather just see a regular freaking wrestling match with Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko.
I agree. And again, it's Vince Russo's take on wrestling. He liked the backstage stuff. He liked the hardcore stuff. He liked anything except a traditional wrestling match or anything that looked like it.
Where I was getting on the Russo thing is the thing that got so much success for the WWF was Stone Cold rallying against the system, rallying against the boss, rallying against the man. It was Stone Cold versus Vince McMahon. That's really what tipped the scales, rather, in WWE's favor. So I get why you would lean into that. And at the same time, you know, they were really just copying the whole WCW versus NWO, and then you became the evil tyrant heel boss long before there was a Mr. McMahon. So I get why, hey, we've got to have an authority figure that they can rally against because it has proven to work. But I think what WCW was looking for here, with the benefit of hindsight, is a new idea, not reheated leftovers. Because that's what this whole thing feels like to me.
Before we sat down to do this show, I talked to myself, as I often do before I do anything. And I thought, you know what? I'm not gonna bury Vince Russo. I don't care, to be honest. I don't care about Vince Russo. Nothing he says or does is ever going to affect me for more than a brief second when I first hear or read about it. But it's also hard to do a show like this without pointing out that I've said years ago.
Hello, Moto.
And that we're now seeing today. When I met Vince Russo, the very first time I talked to Vince Russo, Kevin Nash encouraged me to do. Russo was a writer for the magazine at WWE. Nash had developed a relationship with him before he came to WCW. This is like in 1997, probably. And Nash, because we were tight, came and goes, bro, I just want you to talk to this guy. Just talk to him. So he put Russo on the phone, and I spent about a half an hour just hearing what Russo had to say, because Russo wanted to come to WCW. And I listened to him. I was polite. I had never met him before. I didn't have an opinion of him before. I didn't even have an opinion of what he was doing at WWE because I wasn't watching it. But Kevin endorsed him, so I listened. And I listened to him for, I don't know, 20 minutes, half hour, whatever. And I hung up, and I said, man, he sounds like an interesting guy, but in my mind, there's nothing there. There was nothing under the hood. When I fast forward now, I get sent home. I spent a couple months off. Brad Siegel calls me, asked me to come back because Russo shit the bed. Brad knew it. Brad had just hired him and said, oh, here's a guy. He's the one that turned WWE around. Here, we're going to give him a contract. Probably a lot of people in Turner were reluctant to do so for their own reasons because they just wanted WCW to go away anyway. They didn't want somebody to come in to save it, but they went along with it. And they brought Russo in, and within 30 days, Brad knew he fucked up, which is the only reason he had to eat shit and call me. Right? Not that Brad isn't the one that fired me, but you know what I'm saying. Turner Broadcasting would have not brought me back if there was anything under the hood with Vince Russo. All Russo was capable of doing is seeing something that worked somewhere else, find a way to add his own sauce to it, and call it original. It doesn't work that way. And yeah, you could go back and say, well, Stone Cold Steve Austin, Mr. McMahon was the thing that turned things around in WWE. Absolutely. But fuck, McMahon had been a character on TV for 30 freaking years. This wasn't just some guy coming out of a writer's room that nobody had ever heard of before.
It wasn't 30 years.
And trying to make that guy an authority figure? That isn't going to work. Nobody's going to buy that. Not quickly. Maybe over a long period of time you could figure out a way to make it work. But just to introduce this guy and this character, and he's a fucking writer, and all of a sudden he's got all the stroke. It's such a self-serving, narcissistic view from a creative perspective of what you bring to the table. But I knew that. When I fast forward, I go to work, back to work. Brad Siegel calls me, I go back to work because Brad said, do you think you can work with Russo? I'll feel it out. I felt it out. And I told Brad, there's nothing really under the hood there. He talks a good game. He's a charming son bitch. He can sell you anything. But there's nothing under the hood, and that's what we're seeing here. Nothing under the hood.